Influence Church exists to help you know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and influence your world.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate this amazing worship team put a lot of work in the last few weeks. Yesterday was amazing. A lot of great
I thought you were going to say it was a mess, which is also true.
Amazing, a mess. No, I'm just kidding. But today, actually, is going to be a little laid back because we both were kind of tired and we decided, like, well, do I have to preach or do you want to preach? And then we decided, let's both preach.
You get both of us today.
So usually we don't do that too often, But today we are going to end our series called American Idols, right? Many doesn't even realize that without intentionality, we start idolizing different things, different people, different situation in our life.
And you hear about idols in the Old Testament, like building altars to Baal or, towers to Asherah and all the different idols. And we're like, well, we don't have that here, but there are idols in our culture that we have to deal with and recognize. So in this series, what did we cover so far?
So we talked in the last few weeks about the idol of approval. Well, actually, a lot of people are looking at other people for approval or validation instead of to God, which actually is the most important, and how dangerous that trap is. And also, I share about the idol of money, as Apostle Paul is talking in the New Testament about it.
The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil.
So we address that because everybody, a lot of Christians even think that love of money is the root of all evil. And actually that's not what the Bible said. The root. The love of money is a root of all kind of evil. So it's not the only one. It's not everything happening bad in the world, it's because of money.
So then we talked about the idol of gluttony. That was a fun one, right, kids? And then our podcast last Sunday for our online service, we talked about the idol of politics, which is very relevant in this year of an election year, and particularly with events that even happened yesterday with the attempted assassination of former President Trump. And the world is going crazy. So how do we as Christians stay centered and focused? So that was actually pretty good if you want to go, if I do say so myself. If you want to go back and watch it, it's on YouTube.
So all four topics are on our YouTube channel. Something else we want to cover today is that we are going to talk about another American Idol. And the title of this message, actually, it's called, It's All About Me. Who doesn't like to talk about themselves, right? No? Yep. Just ask Nathan. Just kidding. Sorry, Nathan. Okay, no names.
That's hilarious. You're going to pay for that one. He makes the reels that we post.
But we are all born with this instinct of caring more about ourselves than others. If you don't believe me, I want you to think about the last time you or someone else took a picture of your family and you were in that picture. What is the first instinct? You're like, let me see it, right? You take the camera or you look at it and you don't look at anyone else. You look just at yourself. And if you don't look good, if this show up or your smile is not on your face, you're like, no, take another one. And then take another one. And then take another one until everybody's like, forget about it. Right? Because that's the tendency. If you go shopping and you want to buy a can of beans, those really good beans, bush beans with bacon in it, you know what I'm talking about. but are only 2 cans on the shelf. One is dented and one is perfect. Which one do you pick? The perfect one. None of us think like, oh, I should leave the good one for somebody else. Think about it. It's this tendency in us that we want and we think about ourselves. Let me tell you a quick personal story. I grew up with 7 other siblings, so we are 8, and then mom and dad in a 2-bedroom apartment. Total square footage was roughly around 800 square feet. And 1 bathroom. 1 bathroom that probably the size of a closet in the United States.
A little closet.
A little closet, not a walk-in closet.
Walk-in closet.
No, not a walk-in closet. And one of my brothers loved to be sure his hair looks perfectly. As you can see, I don't care too much. But he was spending 15, 20 minutes, a half hour in the bathroom because one tiny, teeny hair was not sitting right. And you know what? When we are 8 and we are trying to go to school in the morning at 7 o'clock, well, you have only 1 minute and 47 seconds for the bathroom, not a half hour. And we'll knock on the door and almost knock down the door. And then he will be like, one moment. And 5 minutes later, one moment. Quite a few times I wanted to knock down the door. Then we'll sometimes get ready to leave as a family. And I don't know why, but mom put a mirror right when you leave the door, the apartment. There was a mirror. And then we'll call the elevator will come, I will hold the door open, and he was in front of the mirror, arranging his hair. Because he wanted to look really, really good. It was all about himself.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? I just came to mind. Yeah, I didn't make it up.
While self-care and wanting to succeed are not necessarily bad things, when those replace the priority of God in our lives, it is a concern. Self-idolatry is something that we all struggle with. But if we do not keep it in check, we will start hurting people around us because of it. When we are inwardly focused, it's much harder to love others. The Apostle Paul writes to Timothy, one of the youngest church leaders in the New Testament, warning him against being a lover of ourselves. And 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 and 2 says this, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy." Terrible, terrible things, right? But if you pay attention to this Bible verse, actually is starting with lover of themselves, which I think is put first for a reason, because I think should help us realize to not fall for that trap. So the question is, how do I know if I struggle with self-idolatry, and what signs should I look for?
So our culture sends messages constantly telling us what we need, what we should want, what will make our lives better, what will make us happy. It's called advertising. Back in 2007, a market research firm surveyed 4,100 people and found out that an average person at that time saw up to 5,000 advertisements a day. Today, that number is even higher, closer to 10,000 advertisements a day. And the point of advertising is to show you why you need their product, their service, or why you should think a certain way. And it's all about persuasion. It's usually about making money, and we fall for it time and time again, because when we start hearing stuff, we start believing it. If it's on Instagram, it must be true. And it all pulls our desire towards serving ourselves. Full disclosure, when we as a church post on social media, we are advertising too. we need to think through, why would someone want to come to this church? And we're using some of the same psychology that advertising firms use for cars or a bag of chips. But our goal is to help people to know God, to find freedom, to discover purpose, and to influence their world. So persuasion isn't bad, but when it gets us to focus on our selfish desires instead of God, we can fall into that self-idolatry. I mean, just think of some of the phrases that we hear in our culture all the time. Do more of what makes you happy. You deserve it. Speak your truth. You're worth it. And you are worth it. Like, you're worth Christ dying for you, but not so that you can live a selfish and unfulfilling life. He paid way too high a price for that. So here's a few thoughts to consider to help you know if you struggle with self-idolatry. And just a hint, we all do at times, so you're in really good company. So you might struggle with self-idolatry if you search your heart before you search the Bible. Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" Which is why we want to prioritize what God has to say before what our heart has to say. Second, your feelings matter more to you than your faithfulness. And that's a really easy one because, like, my feelings, I have big feelings, and they can take over sometimes. Third, you're overly obsessed with outward beauty and vanity. 1 Peter 3:3-4 says, "Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight." Also, if you look for praises but reject correction. Or, I need a glass of water. Could you get me a water? You lack compassion for those less fortunate than you. Colossians 3:12. Thank you. You're so kind and selfless. Colossians 3:12. "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." I love all of those words, and when you think about them, they actually are all selfless things. They lead to selflessness.
So I suspect that we all struggle with this in some degree. When we struggle with it, how can we get out of it? How can we overcome it? Today, I would like to talk a little about 3 things that we can do to not get sucked into self-worshiping or self-idolatry. And number 1, we need to submit to God and submit to one another. Apostle James says this in James chapter 4, verse 7, "Submit yourself then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." Submission is more than obedience. See, obedience is an action. Sometimes we obey because we might be afraid of consequences. I don't know, but I grew up and, my obedience was not to make mom and dad happy. It's just I will get spanking. Submission is not just obedience. Submission actually is an attitude. Biblical submission means to voluntarily take a position where we put our trust in someone else and accept their leadership. Submission is not slavery, is not manipulation, intimidation, misguidance, or suppression. Submission to God means that we seek His plan, we seek His heart, We recognize his authority and then submit to it voluntarily, wholeheartedly, and intentionally. We submit to God. Submission, in my opinion, should happen not because it is required, but because it is desired. Must be our church, our desire, our attitude towards God, accepting his kingship, his authority, and his leadership. And actually, I'm just gonna go quick to tag team. Don't worry about it because you don't have this Bible verse, but I want to just talk about submit to one another. Because as I said, we have to submit to God, but also we have to submit to one another, which I'm not sure if you struggle with this, but I do. Like, it's really hard to submit to others.
He really does.
She's right here.
Submit. No.
But see, how many of you remember, many, especially the guys, especially men, especially the husband, remember the Bible verse from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, right? Where he's saying, wives, submit yourself to your own husbands. So everybody know that. But not everybody know that actually the verse right before that one, Apostle Paul is saying, so Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So submission is actually in the family of Christ, in the body of Christ, it's going back and forth, forth. It's just, I submit to you, you submit to me. I submit to you, you submit to me. And that is the beauty of submission to one another. So we as together have to submit to God, but also have to learn and try to submit to one another. Anyhow, that was kind of not in my notes.
So submission is the first key. The second is to practice Sabbath. I want to read Exodus 20, starting in verse 8. This is the Big Ten, the 10 Commandments, and we kind of tend to skip over this one because maybe we don't understand it very much, or we think it's not for us, or, you know, especially in our hurry culture that we have. So Exodus 28, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
Can I just interrupt here? How many of you struggle with the Sabbath? How many of you struggle with taking a day off? Because I'll be honest with you, I find each day something to do.
You can go ahead and point to your spouse if that's the person that struggles, or your father.
There you go.
Okay, Sabbath is not just a day off. It's actually a spiritual discipline. In each of the American Idols that we discussed in our series, there's actually a spiritual discipline that can directly counteract that idol. So I just want to go through those real quick. So for the idol of approval, the spiritual discipline that counteracts that is solitude. Being alone with the Lord and seeking his approval so that we're not dependent on anyone else's approval. When we're talking about money, the idol of money, tithing is a spiritual discipline, because when we live on 90% of what we make, we are teaching ourselves to trust God with our finances. With gluttony, big surprise, fasting. Because when we pray for that's the next one. When we deny our physical body something it desires, then we can increase our desire for God. And finally, with politics, the spiritual discipline we talked about was prayer. Because when we pray for our leaders or even our enemies, it brings our hearts back to being heavenly minded. And so for the idol of self, Today, we're talking about the spiritual discipline of Sabbath, when we stop from our work and our striving to purposely rest and connect with God. Then we train ourselves to live in a way where we recognize that God is God and I am not. Our culture, it really doesn't value rest. We have to do. We achieve. More is better. Our accomplishments, our hobbies, our entertainment, more. Think about your last vacation. Did you need a vacation after your vacation to recover from your vacation? That's not Sabbath. When we Sabbath, we stop. We set apart one day a week. That's what holy means, set apart. So when God says honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, he's saying that one day a week is to be set apart for him. And that takes a tremendous amount of intentionality. So I personally have practiced Sabbath for a number of years, and it honestly has revolutionized my mental health. I mean, there's benefits to this. So my Sabbath is Friday, because obviously Sunday is kind of a work day for us. So on Fridays, I don't set my alarm. I wake up and enjoy extra time with my coffee and my Jesus. I sit on my deck in my comfy egg chair, and I do devotions, and I pray, and I journal. I discipline my mind to stop thinking about all of you. Sorry. Because I feel a tremendous amount of responsibility for us as a church to lead you well. And I sometimes can slip into the idol of self by thinking I'm somehow responsible for your spiritual growth. And that's not true. God is God, and I am not. So on Fridays, I hand you all back to him. And he takes you, and my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. I do not check emails. I do not do anything church-related, if possible. I do not go on social media at all, because that's an important reset for my brain. And so what do I do on Sabbath? As I said, I spend extra time with the Lord. I work hard the rest of the week to be able to stop and have no requirements on my time. That one day, I might have coffee with friends. I might play pickleball with my boys, or have a date night with my hubby. Meaningful relational connections. I might spend time outside. I might go for a walk. I might watch a good movie. I might read a mystery novel. I might do laundry, because honestly, that doesn't drain me at all. I don't mind folding clothes and watching American Idol. The other one, not these ones. I might cook a yummy meal for my family, because I really like to cook when I'm not rushed. I do not go grocery shopping, because that stresses me out. So I have these things that for me refresh and reset. I listen to worship music or podcasts or sermons. I fill my heart for the week to come. I stop. And guess what? The world keeps turning without me. It's really amazing. So one of the things that Jesus was criticized for by the religious leaders was healing on the Sabbath, or allowing his disciples to do things like that were not allowed on the Sabbath, like picking grain from the field. So in Mark 2, we see Jesus answer on one of these occasions. Mark 2:27. Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." So Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. And I think Jesus' point here was that the Sabbath is a gift to us for our good. It is not meant to be a burden. We don't want to trade one type of bondage for another. We don't want to exchange hurry sickness of our culture with legalism of religion. But it is important for me that we understand that there's a reason that God directs us to keep the Sabbath holy. It is for our benefit. It reminds us that we are not all-powerful. God is God, and we're not.
And something that I learned in the last few years is that if I want something from Kelly, I should not ask before she has her time with Jesus and coffee. So,
And if it's something about church on a Friday, I tell him to send me an email. Like, he'll come out from his office, because he does different. I'm not responsible for him. So if you're Sabbathing, you're not responsible for other people. But I will be sitting in the living room. He'll come out. It's Friday. Turn around. Literally. So it's really important. And I'm a much nicer person when I Sabbath.
she
saying.
is. That's all I'm going to say.
Hey.
But think about Sabbath as a discipline. You have to keep practicing. You have to keep doing it if you want to get good at it. So, you
And
might not...
This week, I didn't get my Sabbath on Friday because we had the event yesterday. So I've got a plan this week to kind of make up for it. And I know that I'm extra tired and crabby. So I try to stay away from people as much as I can.
So the last but not the least, what we can do to be sure we are focused on God and others and not ourselves, not self-worshiping or self-idolatry, is serve. So the last but not the least, as I said, to avoid the self-worshiping, when we serve, we think more about others than ourselves. And actually, this is God's nature. God's kingdom is kind of an upside-down kingdom. When I say this, is more like, let's think about Matthew chapter 20. Jesus called his disciple, and was two of them that say like, hey, can we be at your right hand and at your left hand? Can we be the number one and number two in the kingdom? And of course, that created, of course, a lot of tension between all the other disciples. But Jesus called his disciples. He explained to them that if they want to be great among others, they have to become servant to others. So Matthew chapter 28 is saying this. And this is Jesus' words. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So this is God's nature. And all of us pray like, can I be more like Jesus? Can I be more like God? Well, sometimes start with us serving, just like Jesus served. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 actually compares the church to a human body. Just like our bodies are made of many parts, so is a church made out of many people with different skills and abilities. And alone, these pieces are not very useful if all will be legs, if all will be brain, will not make any sense because we will not accomplish anything. Think about it. We'll have great ideas if all will be brains. We'll have great ideas, but nothing will get done because we need hands.
Sometimes I feel that way. I got a lot of ideas around here. Who's going to do it?
And you have no ideas how many good ideas people bring to us. Like, hey, we should do this. Hey, we should do that. And like, okay.
I usually say, oh, good, do it. Go ahead.
But we need the hands and feet, right?
Yeah.
We need all the other parts. For this reason, we have to understand all those pieces together is creating something wonderful, something that's been intended to be useful. But also, serving also allow us actually to experience miracles. How many of you know the first miracle that Jesus did, right? Involve alcohol. Everybody should know that. Right? So first miracle that is recorded in the New Testament is just changing the water in wine, right? But think about it. Jesus needed to have few servants there because Jesus told the servants, hey, fill few big jars with water. Now, think about it. Jesus was a guest at this wedding. The servants could have said like, you are not my master. Get out of here. Doesn't make any sense. But the servants did what Jesus asked them to do. And was this miracle happening? And actually the servants were part of a miracle because they decided to serve as servants. So serving others, it's actually helping us be part of miracles and experiencing miracles. So, to get over ourselves, to avoid self-worshipping, let's be intentional in submit ourselves to God and to one another. Also, practice Sabbath, and then serve God. And usually I like to say, let's serve God through serving others. Because I think when we start putting others first, we take the eyes from ourselves and put them on others, which...
And it is interesting that they work together. We Sabbath because we cannot give what we don't possess. So we Sabbath and refresh. And then we serve and we give. And then we Sabbath and refresh and we serve and we give.
And something that I want all of us to realize is we all have our calendars full. We all have our brains full. We all have our hearts full. Whatever might be full with, we have to be intentional in making room for God, making room for His biblical principles. And actually, the worship team is going to come up and is going to lead us in this amazing worship song called Make Room. Because I'll be honest with you, if we just think about it and hope to happen, will never happen. But we have to be intentional in making that room for God to work in our heart and our hearts. And remember, those are disciplines. That means you are not gonna get it perfect from the first time. You have to just keep practicing and practicing and practicing. And as we are practicing, we are going to get better at it.
And I just want to say about the last point about serving, that is something that we as a church do really well, I think. Like, if we were to ask people, or if someone asked us, what is Influence Church about? I can honestly say we love to serve. Serve each other, serve our community. We have hearts to serve, and I'm so very proud to be a part of that. And again, I want to thank everybody for their work yesterday, and there's just so many times where we're able to serve, and it just brings such joy. The food distribution every month, there's so many ways.
Food distribution, if you don't know the facts and the data, it's a growing need in our community. Actually, food distribution, we started, I think, with 40 boxes, probably 2.5 years ago. And this month, we distributed 150 boxes. And actually...
Big, heavy boxes.
Yeah, roughly around 25 to 30 pounds of produce. And we deliver every month thousands of produce. And actually, for the next month, we are gonna have to go to 160 boxes. And I don't know, if this keeps going like this, we are gonna need a bigger trailer. But it's because you guys are part of what we are doing, and I love serving with you. And you know what? God is going to reward that. And let's be intentional in making room in our lives, in our times, in everything that we do, to serve one another, and that way to serve God.